back, everyone. And for this talk, I would like to introduce you to Scott Robertson. I think he doesn't really need an introduction for myself. We all know him. We all love him. Scott, welcome to the virtual stage of Around.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll start my video, say hello at the beginning of this, and then we'll go to the keynote, probably the last you see of me. So hi, everybody. Thanks for hosting.
I'll leave you to it. See you in the Q&A session.
Yeah. Can I see I guess I'm going to do a full screen share, so I won't see the Q&A, but you can tell me if there's questions. I don't mind being interrupted. So.
Okay. You'll want questions throughout. Yeah.
That's fine. That's fine with me. Doesn't bother me.
Cool. Right. So everyone, if you have any questions, feel free to post them on the chat. You can also raise your hand and we can open the mics for you.
Okay, so let me try the share screen. And I will do. Hang on, one more time. Let's try to do the share screen and get keynote only. Share screen and keynote, share. Okay, should be able to see it now, and I will hit play. All right, are we good to go, Daniela? I think so.
Yeah, everything is working.
Okay, great. So I'm just going to do a keynote. I'm going to talk about, let me just minimize these views. There we go. I'm going to talk about digital tools and advancing creativity and how I've used digital tools throughout my career in sort of interesting and odd ways here and there over the last, hang on, it's not, there we go. I have to figure out how to advance it on my laptop. Over the last 34 years. So I have a very sort of broad and interesting and bizarre career path. So this is, I started school at Art Center back in '87 and bring all the way forward to 2021. And you'll see a bunch of companies down along the bottom line here. My first studio in that whole page called Studio X, then a composites technology company where I did wheelchairs, then where I taught at Art Center. And you see a lot of overlaps because I've had multiple jobs sort of throughout my entire career and have been doing multiple things all at once, with the exception of this last block here with this piece of fruit. So you'll see Design Studio Press was happening during the time I was teaching. Gnomon and tutorials were happening. Consulting work is in blue. These two big blocks will stay secret, of course, forever. And now I left Apple in May. I've been doing some NFT special projects, which will start to show the light of day soon, actually, like within the next week or two. You'll start to see a whole bunch of things about those projects. Working on some new DSP books, always ongoing, some freelance work, and now doing a green tech startup, which is what I was doing before I went into Apple. So move forward. So that's just that quick overview. I wanted to show you the sort of diversity and range of things I've hit upon in my career. And that's because I think you can take industrial design thinking and apply it to lots and lots of different industries. And so it's a super skill set to have. These are the sort of summary of the 3 decades of tools that I've used. So obviously the ones at the beginning here, drawing so far left from the very beginning, I was doing these things in Art Center. And they continued, and drawing still continues all the way to present day. So I think this is still a skill set that is super beneficial for everyone to learn and master to the best of your ability, because it's immediate. There's no Command Z. You can share ideas on the fly. It's just excellent. And it informs all sorts of design decision-making as well when it comes to styling. When you start to appreciate the curvature of a line and the balance of lines, you start to be able to evaluate something in a 3D model with the same eye that you do towards your line drawings. So I think that's super helpful. Along the way, of course, it's become digital. So I started out using things like Sketchbook Pro, Infinite Painter in more recent years. Then 2D rendering, of course, was traditional media. Then it went to Photoshop, Illustrator, and now there's a big push in the AI world. So Artbreeder, Galgan, which is Canvas AI now from NVIDIA. And then 3D rendering for me sort of kicked in around, end of the century. last century. That's how old I am. So we're around year 2000. I started out really with Modo and View as my 3D rendering tools, but you'll see now, fast forward, this big push in tools that they have gone, exponentially better. And the point of this slide mostly is how much learning I'm doing up here 30 years after I started my career, how many apps I'm learning and how many are still on my list to learn. 3D modeling, I started with traditional modeling. So wood, metals, clay sculpting, lots of clay sculpting, machine tools, then a little bit of Alias Studio way back in the day when it was new, AutoCAD, SketchUp, Modo, ZBrush, and now doing stuff on an iPad. And then, of course, VR. So Gravity Sketch being probably my favorite modeling tool nowadays. Photography for me started as a design tool and a creative tool. But of course, it was with film. Then it went digital. Then now it's on an iPhone, right? And then graphic design starts in Quark Express and then InDesign. And then, I had to start to learn video editing in order to share tutorials and things on my YouTube channel. So I started on a PC, then I went to a Mac, so ScreenFlow, then now I'm back on a PC doing Camtasia. So lots of tools over lots of decades. This is kind of early work, and this is how it would work in 2D. So these are all Photoshop that start with sketches, or in this case, a 2D model. This is a little foam core model that I staged the lighting in order to get the cast shadow on the ground. And then I painted over it in Photoshop. So the entire bike that you see is painted in Photoshop, but the ground plane came from the photograph that I took. So that's kind of using photos with Photoshop. These are clay models done back in 97, I hate to say. So I've done actually a lot of bicycle helmets. I think I did about 25 production helmets over the years. And I built a lot of the master patterns as well in clay. And then those were digitized and then CNC cut. That's the Hot Wheel that I did. I think that one's all Photoshop. So these are all traditional. And so I'd start with traditional media. And of course, the creativity has to come through in the drawing quality. And then you make discoveries with Photoshop. For sure, it was the start of a digital tool that could inform happy accidents. And so by doing a lot of collages and using textures and things like that, you could start to make discoveries. And then once 3D hit, you could start to block out scenes, get your lighting set up, and then paint back over the top. And that was also an opportunity for creativity sparks. And so what I like to do with the digital tools is I like to sort of abstract them in ways that are maybe not necessarily what they were intended or how they were intended to be used. This is back to 2D now, all Photoshop, traditional drawing in Photoshop. But by mixing and compositing images and blending them on different layer modes and things like that, you can find and make discoveries. And so that was kind of probably the first spark for me of a digital tool becoming a creativity aid. These are all still, those are traditional media on the back of my business cards. This is what the old school way of doing it, drawing, then Photoshop painting, line drawing, illustrating. There you can see the line drawing up top, some 3D generated wheels down below. That was also probably the beginning of how I would use 3D and integrate it. I would just make a couple of elements that were really labor intensive to render with traditional media, like wheels and tires. So those were the things I would bring over from 3D and then do the paint over on top. Brush pen sketches, some marker sketches, line drawings, Photoshop, photographic wheels in this case. So instead of doing 3D, using photos. So you see, it's kind of a mix of all these tools colliding together. Traditional media at the top, Photoshop at the bottom. And then, I can't remember what year, but I started getting into Modo, and then Modo came along with some interesting tools that were made for doing things like replicating lots of things like blades of grass, for instance, and to randomize a repeating 3D element. And then I started thinking, well, I could probably take any other 3D element, and usually in the case of grass, you stick it to a ground plane and you populate it with trees or grass or bushes or whatever. And it was a way that you could do many, many parts very quickly without heavily loading, the scene, because it was sort of instancing, but with some parameters that you could slide things around and get things to move around attached to a surface. So I did a series of these sci-fi suits, and it's basically just a couple of little random shapes stuck to a 3D model of a human figure. And this was really interesting way to work for me, because what it's sort of totally backwards to the way you would generate an idea. Normally when you draw, you start with a blank piece of paper and you do a line drawing, you make some discoveries, but you're really relying on your own visual library and maybe some reference that you had in front of you, or from, some travels you did or photos you took yourself. But inevitably, it's just your own visual library. You're trying to find ideas, you're sketching on the page, you're putting down even abstract random marks, et cetera. But you always start usually from a blank piece of paper, and then you build and you go like line drawing, value, 3D, photoreal rendering at the end to present. So, you step your way along into full color. In this case, you start the opposite way, meaning you start fully photoreal because it's a 3D rendering, and then you have to work backwards. And when you paint over the top, you have to simplify it. And so it's totally at the opposite end of the spectrum from a thinking process of how you take it and how you work with it. So it's the process of taking things away and simplifying when you do your paint over on top. But anyway, it's super fun. Completely takes me down paths that I would have never done in a Photoshop rendering. And the reason I say that is because one of the things we always stayed away from in doing industrial design or concept work is having to render a whole bunch of transparent layers with reflections, et cetera. But this is like 3 skins inside Modo, and I'm doing some just simple image projections and getting all the graphic shapes sort of as happy accidents. And I'm getting glowing lights, I'm getting transparency, I'm getting reflectivity all at the same time in the very first, call it a sketch render, because it's not well thought out, it's not refined, it hasn't been painted over. That's the first, what I would call digital sketch. And then you would paint over the top and you would refine it. But I would not do this, and I would not explore these materials in a different medium. And that is, with these suits specifically, that was a really fun discovery. I took and did a whole series of image projection things for the shoe industry for a while. And I can't remember when these are. It's not dated. Anyway, it's a while ago. And it was just setting up some UV maps. But you typically with a model, you do one UV map, right? That's optimized without distorting your texture, and you apply your texture that you've designed for the object, right? But in this case, we made 16 UV maps for the same exact surface and the same exact object. And each UV map was made in a different unwrap method and even abstracted a little bit. And then we would throw textures at it. And I worked with Rob Baldwin on this, and he wrote a nice little UI overlay inside Modo that you could just move some sliders and you could change the amount of repeats of the texture. And you could also rotate it, you could mirror it, you could repeat it, all those sort of things you'd normally do with an image on a UV map, but typically you only make one. In this case, we made 16. And so you would set up a little animation, and each frame of an animation, you would then program a different set of movements on the slider to move the image on the shoe. And I would get a resulting different graphic design, basically, on the same upper. All the bottoms are the same. But then I would get a new design direction to evaluate. And so then you let the animation run, usually overnight, and you come back to, like 1,000 shoe variations the next day. And even if you're only getting, 1% would be 10 amazing shoes. So we were hitting more like 10% that were really interesting. And so if you ran 1,000, right, now you have 100 shoes to pick from. So again, this is the same idea that you're starting photoreal. It's more advanced than you need. It's more complex. And then you have to work backwards. But totally sparks creativity. And then I went into Photoshop and I made some actions to add the laces and the backgrounds and the details and the borders and all those sorts of things. But what I'm getting out of the render is the side view and the top view at the same time. And then I used photography of the laces, made some masks, right? And then I just hit the one button and it auto loads all those. And then I can colorize them to match the original. But, and same with textures. You'll see some little textures. Those were also added like on the toe box of the shoe on the left or the side of the shoe on the right, at the bottom. But those are basically untouched, straight out of this, happy accident process. Making marks to inspire. For sure, you can, I'll just let this play while I chat. You can try to restrict your drawing motion in a pursuit of originality. And so what I mean by that is that in this case, I was using primarily straight lines. This was just off my YouTube channel a while ago now, a couple months ago. But I was restricting my strokes to basically straight lines to try and find a harmonious styling direction. And then once I hit on it as sort of triangles, sort of dominating the design direction, then I sort of try to work that up into the rest of it. But initially, the very first strokes and the very first marks were done to help me make a discovery. So you can totally do that as well. I'm going to skip past this. It's not worth chatting about as much. Brush pen sketches. Again, making marks to inspire or find creative solutions. So you always see me a lot of times sketch with a very light marker, and you look at the sketch in the upper left, the light marker is there to make discoveries. And then you come back with the pen work second, and you pick out the things that your brain sees. And so what a lot of times you're trying to do is you're trying to trick your brain into seeing in very light value changes, your brain will start to see things, right? It's just like seeing animal characters in the clouds, for instance, when you look up at the sky. Same thing here. You want to sort of trick your brain. So whether you're using the digital tools or traditional media, you're trying to stimulate that part of your brain with abstraction and allow you the opportunity to make discoveries. And it's inevitable. We all see. So whenever we look at like symmetrical patterns, we are pre-programmed whenever we look at an image to always scan for other humans first. So if you look at any symmetrical images, for instance, you'll always see a lot of faces inside those patterns. And you have to sort of free yourself up to be sloppy and not have any expectations. Don't worry about the drawing quality. And you can also do the same thing in 3D. And so this was done with just some markers on a piece of Mylar, so they would all blend together. You could do the same with any medium. It gets a little harder to do sometimes with some digital tools, but you saw with those shoes that you could do essentially the same thing. The problem is you're always starting photoreal, so it always looks more finished as a concept. You have to just remind yourself that it's not that finished. There's a lot of work left to do, and treat them as sketches and present them as such. Don't, people will try to read more into them because of the photoreal nature of the rendering quality. But that's not the most effective way to use them. So I knew I wanted to do some sort of little landscape here. So I'll fast forward to a couple of examples. So there's kind of one that I took and put it into Photoshop and did the difference compositing method to get abstract color palettes, maybe things I wouldn't normally paint, for instance. So this one, you'll see there's look center and then a little left and a little down. I saw when I looked at this image, 3 figures and those little huddled sort of nubs there, and watch the paint over, you'll see where they show up. And so that's a paint over. And so what you have to do is you have to work over it and edit and start to eliminate, and because there's a lot of transparency, you want to get rid of those and say, well, what's solid, what's in the foreground, what's in the midground, what's in the background. You'll see this is an example. I saw these green shapes as foreground rocks. I see a distant horizon there. And again, these are all happy accidents and patterns and shapes. And you'll see here's the paint over. So now I've made my decisions. What's background, midground, foreground is the ship. And then here's a later paint over of the same piece. All traditional media going into digital, which is Photoshop. Here's another one. This is like a big, I imagine this, usually it helps me to imagine to have a horizon line, at least if you're doing an environment, so that you get some of the basic perspective worked out, and it starts to hint and feel like you're looking at something that could be real. So here's the paint over starting to define, again, that background, middle ground, foreground elements, working a little bit on the perspective, trying to lay out the scenario. And then here's the paint over of that one. And I've added a couple of photographic elements. You'll see Neville Page dotted around here in the foreground, that sort of thing. There's Fat Neville and Skinny Neville down on the right. Here's another one. And a lot of times they'll start black and white and then go to color. Okay, so when I started 3D, and this is, I think, a way a lot of us start and how it informs our creativity. And it becomes really just a production tool. And you really just model and render the most complex things. And then you Photoshop paint the things that are more illustrative or things that you can do to the same photographic level. And so that's an example of how I would use a 3D underlay. Here's another example. I was also I never like to do UVs or take any time with my models. So I would do something like this, then just render it again in tan, which is the dirt color. And then I would just erase the dirt color on top of the previous rendering and get a result like that, as opposed to going in and weathering it and doing it properly. Because I was just after the end illustration. But again, I'm using the tools, to inspire and inform different ways of working and different design solutions. Here's another example. This 3D sculpt that Neville did, and then I threw some image projections. So this is kind of the shoe idea of taking images and projecting them from different axes and getting some happy accidents. This is just city building in using replicators again. So this is just a bunch of random parts really, and then scattered around on a ground plane. And a lot of times I would do these composition studies where I would make a little quick animation, and each frame I would just move these those elements in the background, just move them around just randomly. Don't try to plan for it. Just move the slider, go to the next frame, move the slider, don't even look at the result, then go to lunch. And before you go to lunch, you hit render animation and you export a frame, right? It's still image from every frame. And then I come back from lunch and I look and see, are there any happy accident compositions, right? So all I'm doing is just changing the scale and position and rotation of those background, midground elements, or background elements in this case. And then I said, oh, this is the one I like. I'm now going to do a paint over on top of this one. So now you go to Photoshop, you add some textures, you add some atmosphere, some life to it with some wind blowing and, smoke or whatever that is, and dust coming off of that hillside, that sort of thing. Same here, doing some random shapes, then painting over the top. This was a view just for the background plate, and then, right? And then it informs all sorts of things, can inform a color palette, can inform different textures. I do the same with photography, and it falls into the digital tools because it's now digital photography, but this is a little crystal at a museum. And then I saw a little robot standing on a rock. So it's the quick paint over. This is the same museum. Turned this, skeletons are amazing for mechs because they have all the pivot points, right? All the joints are there. But you've taken away all the muscle, and now you're down to just the mechanism. And then you can do some fun paint overs of those as the source material. So you'll see these are my paint over steps. Again, made the discovery through a digital photograph. There was the original. There's another crystal, some quick steps on this one. See the numbers adding up in the chat there, but I don't know how to answer those questions. So I'll just have to, let me just get through this. I'll go back and answer all the questions, try to finish with enough time. And that was the final, I think. And then here was the original. And what I loved about this, of course, was the structure. Okay, now the future. So this is the last part. So again, to review, you'll see that it's kind of an endless learning process, and don't think that you're going to master one program and go out and you're done, right? Yeah, you might stay in it for years and it will become part of your toolkit and your tool set for a long time, but you'll evolve as the tool evolves, and then new tools will come along. So I would really encourage people to be very open-minded about new tools. And then after you learn, the way I like to learn new tools, because I've learned a lot of new tools just in the last several years, is I like to watch a lot of tutorials about the tool first before I try to do anything in it. then I can better understand the architecture and the thinking behind the programming of the app itself. And what I mean by that is that when you start to understand the sort of philosophical or the design tenets of the structure of how it's organized, you can start to guess at where the tools will be that you need. And so that's what I get from watching tutorials first. I get the overview of the architecture and the capabilities. And so what I'm doing is making mental notes when I watch tutorials about, oh, that's a cool tool, but I could use it like this, right? So I try to always be open to finding new ways to use the tools that exist, like the UV example from the shoes, having many UV maps and giving us different results as because we had all those different mapping methods, is stay open to it and then try to abstract it. So I love to take the tools and try to abstract them and figure out how can I use them in different methods and unintended ways. So this is the traditional, right? And then that's my Photoshop paint over. And then here's working up the same sort of concept inside Gravity Sketch, which for me is the most natural modeling program that has ever existed, honestly. And I've been trying, I've been doing it now for 3 decades, and not Gravity Sketch, but 3D modeling. And so it feels the most like drawing. So it's very, very easy for me because I draw in XYZ planes. I draw just like I'm wafting or drafting things in 3D, right? So effectively when I draw, I'm modeling. And so the transition into Gravity Sketch, where you're drawing and at the same time you're modeling, is super intuitive. And so that would be the rough sketch. And then there's the finished render in Octane. And that's everything done straight out of Gravity Sketch, with the exception of the wheels and tires came out of Modo. But all the rest of it straight out of, and my normal pipeline is Gravity Sketch, Modo to set up all the materials, and then I export a package into Octane, reestablish my materials in there because I like the quality of the light. I also like BDB clouds, and more than anything, I love the GPU rendering speed. So these are examples. That's actually the same model from the previous. It's the truck, and then I just squashed it all and took, did this new version of it as more of as a hot rod. This was probably a 4 to 6 hour rework of the previous model. There's the top is the sketch, and they're super fun to take a side view sketch and just jump right into Gravity Sketch. Take the side view lines. Eric had a really nice presentation the last hour before me, and deep dive into all the automotive things you can do. And I totally agree with everything he said. It's an amazing tool, and you can take it a long way, much further than people think. But one of the really fun ways to do it is to work with a side view sketch. And the reason I draw a lot traditionally with the side view before I jump into Gravity Sketch is that I'm able to see the entire silhouette much more easily than I can in VR. VR is still, because of the resolution, it's still hard to get a feel for the whole thing from a distance, right? If you go too far away in VR, the resolution is very small because the model you're looking at is taking up a small portion of your screen res. So it just gets blurrier and blurrier, and it's hard to evaluate. I find that I have a better line sensitivity and proportion sensitivity when drawing. And then it's super easy to capture that into 3D when I jump into VR. So this is an example rendered in Octane. It's another Gravity Sketch model, including all the cut lines. I do those in Gravity Sketch as well. Pretty much try to do as much as I possibly can because, one, it's easier, I think, and it's just so much fun. So I totally enjoy, like Garrick was doing earlier, jumping into the inside of the vehicle, the outside. I model everything 1-to-1 scale. A couple other examples. Again, all Gravity Sketch with the exception of the wheels. Now moving on from the 3D into the 2D world, where a lot of future tools are going using AI. So this is 3 developer guys called Viscom, and this is AI's attempt at trying to render my line drawing. And it's very, very early days. It's, the program's very, very early, but you can see there's potential. Definitely there's potential for happy accidents because the way it applies the value so far is pretty illogical. but you still can start to see things. And it's whether you just see a graphic breakup, like along the side pod there, where that area is dark and the other areas are light. Maybe that's just a graphic break. It doesn't have a lot to do maybe with where the light's coming from, et cetera, but it gets your brain thinking. And so I'm a big fan of using imagery as a stimulus to help encourage your creativity. And I like to use any tool available to create that imagery. So this is a yacht that I built in Gravity Sketch, and then here's the rendering of it in Octane. These are sculpted and rendered in 4K on my iPad in Nomad Sculpt. I can do the same sort of thing in Forger as well. Very similar apps, but it's just mind-boggling that I can model this with 3 or 4 million polygons on an iPad and then generate a 4K render in 5 to 6 seconds. It's just ridiculous, and it's got tons of post lighting effects, etc. There's my illustration on the left. This is NVIDIA Canvas, and just doodling around with a hint of some perspective and a landscape, and then that's the result on the right. So you get a photoreal result of your image map that's basically color coded to different types of vegetation, rocks, sky, water, stream, those sorts of things. And that's, you're telling the AI, hey, these colors are meant to be those sorts of things, and these are the shapes of the silhouettes, and you figure out all the rest, and you can also apply different photographic styles to those things. These are other examples out of NVIDIA Canvas, and I've applied a little watercolor filter to both of these, and then I've painted back over. I just grabbed one of my custom brushes quickly of some people, some silhouettes, and just dropped them in for scale. And then here I did a little bit longer paint over in Photoshop, but the image started as one of the Canvas AI things, and then I used some brush stamps for the ship, some quick Sparth brushes to get quickie ship, and then one of my little guys down there. This is Artbreeder landscape. This is untouched, straight out of Artbreeder, with the exception of adding a person and maybe touched up some of the foreground bushes and things. Not very well, but that's straight out of Artbreeder. And what is cool about doing landscapes in Artbreeder is that you can input the imagery that's your own imagery. So you control the data set, and that's where the originality happens and the creativity happens using AI photo bashing, basically, is on the front end. It's the control and design choices you make about the data set that drives the AI combinations. So when you control the data set, you control the originality and the creativity. And so I started to find that whether I was doing a portrait face or a landscape, is that I could do a black and white marker sketch, just literally straight black and white, or maybe only 3 grays, and use all that for my silhouette shapes and my composition. And then I could mash it with a illustration style and blend those two things together. And so the illustration style might have been one of my dad's landscape paintings, right? So, and I have, I'm the only one who has access to those in my own data set. So you can really start to control the originality. So those are straight out. And then you would crop them and do a paint over, that sort of thing. But again, digital tools to spark creativity, not something that maybe a color palette I would have used or painted, or maybe shapes that are very unfamiliar to my own visual library. So it's always about, for me, using these tools to expand my visual library. That's it. So I'm going to stop sharing, and then maybe I can answer some questions. Can't see my mouse anymore.
Thanks, Scott. That was
awesome.
Awesome.
Rapid fire. That was super fast. That was a crazy, it was like 144 slides in 35 minutes. So that was super rapid fire.
That was fast.
That's the problem with getting older, right? You have all this back stuff, and so like, what are you gonna share? There's too much. There's too many things. So
yeah, and the thing is, like, you keep using it, right?
Yeah, I've tried to use all that's actually where I'm getting at right now, is that I'm like, my head's about to explode with all the apps that are in there. And you definitely reach a point of saturation where you're like familiar with everything, but master of none, right? And so I definitely have and feel a desire to pare back the apps that I use once I make the discoveries, right? Because the discoveries are still there when I want them, right? So you have to do like an initial deep dive and try to almost break the tool or abstract it in a way to make some happy accident discoveries. And once I learn it, I sort of just put it, I don't put it literally on a list, but I put it on a list in my mind that, oh, you know what, if I ever need that, that's the app I should go do that in, right? And so I have this whole approach of, oh, you know, it's not a singular ecosystem, it's bits and pieces from everything. And of course, it's frustrating when you try to go do it and you can't remember how, right? So I always try to save a file that at least gives me like breadcrumbs, like, you know, like all those suit replicators or the shoes. It's like I haven't done that in a decade, right? But I still have the files. And I'm hoping if I opened it, I could figure out how I did it.
Yeah, and definitely like software keeps changing, right? So even if you know how to do it 10 years ago, maybe it's very different right now.
It's totally changing. And I just bought another app last night called Repper, R-E-P-P-E-R, and it's a pattern making thing for mostly people that do prints for clothing, right? You can take your photo source and then you can make a really cool, there's a whole variety of sliders. And so I'm trying to make some really abstract images to do projections on, you know, car bodies, like for really interesting sort of art car wraps, right? And so, but I need to make a whole bunch of them in a very short period of time. And so they need to be sort of auto-made, auto-generated. And this is kind of the closest I could get, where again, I control the data set. I move the sliders, right? And so I get something original that nobody else has because I have the originality of the image at the front end, right? And then I make the choices in the middle, and then I have the result. So, and then I throw it back on top of a gravity sketch model, right, as an image projection, which is just like the shoe stuff. So yeah, it's super fun. It's never ending.
It's never ending. And I think like what I got from your talk, and this is something really interesting that I've never actually thought about it in that way, which is kind of weird, is that you're experimenting with digital tools. And it's something that we do as designers and creatives with physical things. Like we do a lot of experimentation with materials, with, you know, like putting things together in the physical world. But there's something really weird that happens in the digital tools that we sort of like need to marry a tool or a process for some reason. And what I'm seeing in your work is that you're actually adopting or like implementing that experimental workflow that we all have in the physical world, but with your digital tools.
Yeah, it's very much the world of like collage or mixed media, right? It's like you do a marker sketch, then you grab a Prisma pencil, and then you throw some gouache on it, right? Sort of, I see like these apps are all representations of those kind of mediums all coming together. Yeah,
only that now every day there's something new coming. So there's a lot of awesome work, amazing work, claps. But guys, come on! I thought you were going to have a lot of questions.
There's a good question from Joe. It's Repper. It's R-E-P-P-E-R. So Joe, that's what it's called. iPad M1 chip. I think those were actually done on my older iPad Pro, but I have the newer one with the M1 chip, but I haven't done a lot of sculpting on it yet.
We are also opening the mics. If there's anyone that wants to speak, feel free to raise your hand. What does Art Reader do? Haven't heard of that app.
Oh, it's Art Breeder, B-R-E-E-D-E-R. So Art Breeder, you auto-generate by mashing up. It's like a sophisticated photo bashing app. And in some categories, you can control the data set. Now, when you go there, don't be put off by the gallery, because I would say that the gallery is not necessarily super inspiring, right? It's just what's trending among that community. And it's not a lot of, from what I can gather, it's not a lot of professional, concept artists that are doing that. Now, a lot of the professionals that do use it don't share in that gallery. So the good stuff is not influencing and showing up in the gallery. So what you have to do is you just have to trust that if you control the data set, you can manipulate it and get amazing results. So I did post a thing on my Artstation that has a little gallery of art breeder examples. And just so you can see something where when you control the data set, what you can get. So I would say when you go there, don't be put off by, what you see.
By the gallery. And Scott, what is your ratio between play, exploration, and work towards outcome?
It just depends on deadlines, right? So all summer, I was doing tons of play after I left. Honestly, after my day job was done at Apple, and I just took the whole summer. I did this NFT hot rod, which is dropping in a couple of weeks from Crypto Motors. And I did that as kind of but that was only a day or two a week. And then all the rest was all the art breeder. I was doing tons of art breeder. I was doing lots with you guys with tool talks. Like every other week we would get on and have developer calls. I reached out and I was working with the Viscom guys, advising and consulting a bit there. And then the NVIDIA Canvas people, I talked with that dev team. So almost my entire summer was like free pro bono activities related to creativity tools, which I love. But now I'm starting to get busy again with some actual jobs that I have to pay attention to. So I think this is actually my last sort of public freebie thing I have time for. And I'm now about ready to buckle down for a really difficult 30 to 45 day sprint, long hours every day, nonstop until it's done.
Yeah, well, we're definitely going to miss you.
But I go in waves. Like when I was at Apple, 0 for 3.5 years of this kind of, like, at least I was doing lots of play on the outside, but I couldn't share any of it. So,
Yeah. How do you think about the use of intuition and new tools?
Let me see how that one's worded about the use of intuition. Adam, yeah, good question. I think, I'm not exactly sure the meaning behind that, but the power of intuition comes into full effect if the app has been properly programmed or designed, right? So what I mean by that is that if the UI has a logic behind it, then you intuitively know how to use the app after only a couple hours, right? But if it's really clumsy and it's an adaptation, let's say in VR of a desktop, and it's just a floating window of the same UI, right? You're like, what? There's like, the res doesn't support it, right? And there's too many small bits of text, and you tell it hasn't been optimized for a different medium. So I think when the UI is elegant, then intuition comes in a big way. You just find it easy to do.
And we have one here. How are your learning materials going to evolve with some of these new tools you're exploring? What can we expect?
Well, depends on schedule and timing, but that's one of the reasons I always try to learn new tools, is to stay relevant and then adapt the prior tutorials and knowledge and books and adapt them into the future. They're living documents in a way. They're not really just like a one and done. It's a foundation skill I think everybody should learn, traditional drawing, because it really helps your modeling. And then in turn, your modeling starts to inform your drawing. There's a really nice balance there. But I think that it will probably take the same sort of form as when I get to a position where I feel really comfortable about a pipeline or discoveries I've made, then I'm willing to share publicly. So Gravity Sketch webinar we did like a month ago is a good example, right? We talked about it in the spring. I was like, no, I'm not quite there yet. Let me practice over the summer and let me get to a point where I think there's a good message and there's something worth sharing. And then I jump in and share it publicly, whether it's on my YouTube channel or a webinar with you guys. So I think that's the short form that it takes is tutorial, of videos, tutorials. And then the long form it takes is a deeper dive into a comprehensive textbook, basically.
And a sort of connected question. Any plans to bring back your workshops?
Not right now. I'm too swamped at the moment. I did my career backwards. I did all my education at the beginning of my career, right? Teaching and art center and things like that, and the workshops and the DVDs. And then I went to work professionally for big companies. And usually you do it the other way around, right? Usually you do it like Eric, who was doing it, like you work 19 or 20 years at companies, and then you leave and you start a school, right? And you do the school teaching is really pleasant to do when you're older. And I totally flipped it the opposite. So I don't know. I don't know when I'm going to get back to it at this point.
Yeah, well, I mean, then you became the institution that teaches everyone how to sketch.
Olivia had a quick question there. Sculpting apps on the iPad. I really like Nomad Sculpt and Forger are probably my two favorite. I have seen, and I would say Glenn Southern is like the guru of character sculpting tools and just sculpting tools in general. And I defer to him, and I always go to his YouTube channel to see what's happening. So I would say look up Glenn Southern and look at his Southern GFX on YouTube and see what he's into. I know right now he's into Sculpt VR or something, but he does a ton of gravity sketch. He does everything. So he's like my sort of tip of the spear guru on what's happening with creativity tools.
We will link him in a bit. Oh, there you go. Someone linked it. Thank you, Alberto. I am a huge fan of your instruction books. I would like to apply the exercises in your 2D sketching books in VR while practicing gravity sketch. Do you think this is a reasonable approach? And do you have any advice for this?
Totally reasonable. And it's actually the way I use gravity sketch is I totally do all my line evaluations the same way, and it feels like I'm drawing. So I would say that, and like one example in the book, there's called like two curve combination, right? It's like it's a curve that curves in two directions, right? From side view and from top view, they have a different curvature, and you get a resulting line in space. That's an amazing way to just free sketch and gravity sketch, and then go to the side view and see what the line is doing, make some changes to it, and then realize how that's affected the top view. So I really think it helps you to pre-visualize in your mind XYZ section drawing. And when I start all my sketches, it's basically section drawing, and then I do my surfacing. So yeah, it totally carries over. I basically build wireframes just like my line drawings.
Thanks for sharing your works and also your awesome tutorials, which is available everywhere. I have a question. Do you have a team or do you work solely? These are a lot of works.
No, it just depends. If I'm with a company, of course, it's a big team and it's a project based and there's lots of people, and that's the fun of doing those sort of projects. A lot of the things I showed in that slideshow, that was almost all of that was by myself. But you got to remember, I've been at this for a long time. So it's not like, I've been at it 5 or 10 years. I've got a body of work of, 30 years to pull from. So yeah, it looks like a lot of work because it is a lot of work, but it just takes time. You get there. But whenever I can afford it, I would work with a team. So.
Cool. And so we have 2 raised hands. People actually want to speak. So
okay.
Jaren, could you help us turn Les Nelken's microphone on, please? Les, you can talk now. Yeah.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, Les.
Oh, great. Hi, Scott. Hey, I love your technique of dirtying up vehicles where you render a version that's, say, just beige, and then you render a version that's fully rendered.
Yes.
And then in Photoshop, you kind of composite those. Now, I don't know, have you tried that at all in Gravity Sketch? Because I wanted to do that like a couple of weeks ago after I saw your other talk about that. The problem is that there doesn't seem to be a way in Gravity Sketch to lock down the POV where you take your snapshots. So you can exactly get that same POV to take a duplicate snapshot after you've changed something on the vehicle, like basically added a new material.
I think you set a viewpoint, if I'm right. Jaren can back me up on this or not, but I think if you set a viewpoint,
that's correct.
You would then have a frame that has a fixed POV. And then I don't know about snapping the image from the viewpoint though, Jaren. I don't know the answer.
Yeah, you can do that.
You can do that. Okay, so go to viewpoints. It's on the left, all the way towards the bottom. No, it's in your tools palette, right? I can't remember where it is.
Yeah. It's on the tool, the general
Yeah.
tools palette. Yeah.
Viewpoints. So set your viewpoints and you'll have a locked POV.
Okay, cool. Because I think I tried that and it didn't look like you could actually take the snapshot exactly from that. But I'll try it again because obviously you can.
Sharon says there's a way. So if it doesn't work, it's his fault.
Okay, I'm sure it works. Thank you.
Yeah.
We'll do a quick tutorial, if not, and post it on Instagram for everyone that is interested. All right. Then, Darren, can you turn Sven's microphone as well, please?
Hello, Scott. How are you?
Hey.
This is Ben. Yeah, I've enjoyed watching your work over the years, but and not a direct question with regard to Gravity Sketch, and more on the training and learning side. I've been around about as long as you, and we've probably seen similar things in terms of the adoption of new tools, and the resistance. And I think it came up in an earlier conversation. But I'm kind of wondering what your advice would be to students. And for me, it's new employees at the company that are coming out of school, and I see resistance to different tools at different times. And how do you see perhaps, maybe giving people advice on your approach, which is similar to my approach, that it's not one tool, it's every tool, it's, whatever tool works kind of. Yeah. How do you communicate that, I guess, is my question.
Well, it's not going to resonate with everyone, first off. But I think if you ask a question about, do you want to be a thought leader, right? So if you want to be a thought leader and help shape the future of all those tools, right? And the way that we work and the way that our brains start to visualize and then communicate ideas with other people, then I think you have a strong interest and open mind to all those new tools. If you're really in it just as a day job, right? You want to just learn the skill set that helps you get the day job. And then you just want to fulfill your tasks to retain the paycheck. But that's a short-term viewpoint, honestly. And eventually your skill set will no longer be relevant. And so if you want to ensure that paycheck that you think will always be there, then you need to stay relevant. And so I think those are kind of the two ways that I would approach it. It's important to stay relevant. It's important to be involved in a community and the way that we work and the process. So I find that those are kind of in my own mind, those are the ways I think about it. And when people are resistant, those are sort of the arguments or the paths I try to share, the scenarios I try to share. You can't just say, open your mind and do it. That doesn't work. You just have to lay down, I think, a couple of examples of, and one of the ways to do that is just ask people questions.
Cool. Thank you.
Great. Well, I think we'll leave it with that last question. And thank you so much, Scott. This has been great, as always, very inspiring.
My pleasure. It's always fun to connect.
And good luck with the big work that you're.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Scott. And for
Thanks,
everyone
everybody.
else, stay tuned. In 5 minutes, we start with our last talk with Saiful Hack. See you in a bit.
Oh yeah, he's one of my old students. I'm going to heckle him.
Nice. Bye.
Bye.